First of all, I wish to commend the Regional Group for raising this important issue. It's an issue of the primary medical certs, and the lack of personalised transport supports for people with disabilities is something that is discussed regularly at Disability Matters Committee meetings. And it's also an issue which is raised at practically every meeting I attend with disabled people or their representative organisations. People with disabilities should be able to lead full and active lives within their communities, but there remain many obstacles which work to prevent them from doing so, and access to personal transport is one of these. So while improving access to public transport is an important issue in its own right, it is unreasonable to suggest that it can address the transport needs of many disabled people who may live in rural areas or struggle to get to bus stops or stations. And many disabled people tell me that it is impossible to get a wheelchair-accessible taxi when they order one, as the HSE seem to have contracted a lot of them for their own use. And I am interested in the scheme you referenced in the CHO areas in Dublin. I think it's something that could be rolled out to other areas as well. But without access to personal transport, many disabled people cannot do what others take for granted, which is working or visiting family and friends or shopping or any of the other aspects of life where mobility is essential. Now, so in the report before Christmas titled Grounded on Equal Access for People with Disabilities to Personal Transport Schemes, the Ombudsman focuses attention on the fact that personal transport supports for people with disabilities are inadequate, unfair and inequitable. And the report points out in 2013 the government decided to discontinue both the mobility allowance and the motorised grant to new applicants. Now, at that time it was said it would draw up an alternative scheme. We're 9 years on and there's no alternative put in place. And it also outlines that the remaining support available for those living with a disability is the Disabled Drivers and Disabled Passenger Scheme, which provides a range of tax reliefs linked to the purchase and use of specially constructed or adapted vehicles by drivers and passengers with a disability. However, it goes on to highlight that this scheme is inadequate to meet the needs of many people living with a disability, as the limited medical criteria for eligibility are excessively restrictive, and a recommendation that the Department of Finance introduce legislation that will replace the existing medical criteria with an overall assessment of general mobility was never acted on. So it's shameful in 2022 disabled people are still not able to participate equally and actively in their community and in their work. Now, recently it emerged that the entire appeals board of the scheme resigned after expressing concern about how the scheme was being handled, and amid ongoing concerns that it is too difficult to obtain a primary medical cert. And I'm not surprised, because when looking at the figures there, out of 401 appeals assessed in 2017, only 12 were successful. In 2018, 20 out of 386. In 2019, 9 out of 424, and in 2020, 4 out of 116. And that was the year when the scheme was actually suspended for quite an amount of the year. So, these issues have been raised repeatedly with the government. I think the Minister for Finance is totally failing to show leadership here, and it is people with disabilities who are paying the price. Now, many disabled people are effectively being denied the ability to travel due to the stringent criteria for obtaining a primary medical certificate. So it's denying disabled people their rights under the UN CRPD to live fully independent lives. And it can have a huge personal impact on personal lives, as they're unable or less able to live independently, socialise and work without these vital supports. And I think that over the last 18 months we've seen a litany of failures in how this scheme has been handled by the Finance Department, and this must change. A Supreme Court ruling in June of 2020 overturned the board's decision to deny 2 families a primary medical cert. This ruling led to the suspension of the scheme. It was reopened in January 2021 after an amendment to the Finance Bill. This was supposed to be an interim measure, and a review of the scheme was promised by the Minister for Finance in January of 2021 to be carried out within the year, but it was never delivered. And in media comments recently, the Finance Department confirmed that they had not carried out the review that the Minister had undertaken to do, and we're now 20 months after the Supreme Court ruling. So I think Minister Donoghue must answer questions about his total failure in how this scheme has been handled. It's a direct breach of the UN CRPD, which we as a country ratified in 2018, but we are a way off implementing. And I do not feel there's any sense of urgency to address the issue of personal transport options. The Transport Working Group established 2 years ago seems to have done very little as part of the National Disability Inclusion Strategy, and maybe it's another victim to COVID, or maybe it's another excuse to delay things. An immediate review of these schemes is needed to take place, with input from disabled persons' organisations and other relevant stakeholders, and must include detailed actions to widen eligibility to the scheme and improve its administration. Thank you.